everybody!
Hello.
Welcome back. I'd like to apologize in advance for this episode. I'm dealing with some allergy stuff, so I'm going to cough my way through the episode.
And I'm
sorry.
a cyborg, apparently.
And Russ is more man than machine, which is why he's always slightly out of focus.
Right. I think I have the soul of an ancient god living inside of me.
What are you doing with that?
That I hope will manifest maybe by 35.
So, we are here today not to discuss Russ's bizarre fantasy life, but to discuss another sequel.
Yeah.
Dragon Quest II.
We're on sequels. That's exciting to me.
Yes.
Because generally sequels are better than what came before them. So.
We did do a sequel before. Is this our first sequel? I've forgotten now.
I've forgotten as well. Yes.
This might be the first.
No, we
did
played
Lufia 2.
Lufia 2. Yes.
This is the second. This is the sequel to our show about sequel.
Right.
So, without further ado and nonsense, let's get into personal history with Dragon Quest II.
Dragon Quest II / Dragon Warrior 2.
Yeah, and we're not going to dive into that again. If you want to see that discussion, go watch the first Dragon Quest video, and you're covered.
So I played Dragon Warrior 2, like most of these RPGs that we review. I played it for the first time when I was a kid. I had the original NES cartridge. It was actually the last of the NES Dragon Warriors that I played. I played 4 first, then 3, then 1, and then 2. So it's kind of an interesting experience doing it when I was a kid because it was the last one, so I'd already played 3 and 4 before this one, which obviously had a lot more going on. So this one was a little basic for me. But I did play it and enjoyed it, and I have played it again recently, 20-something years later. So I'm excited to talk about it.
So this was actually my first time to play Dragon Quest II. But I am a fan of the series overall. I've played most of them now, except for 3 and 9. Those are the only ones I haven't played, and I have a feeling we'll do 3 at some point, so that'll catch me up. I like Dragon Quest actually quite a bit more than the Final Fantasy series at this point, because whereas Final Fantasy is constantly trying to reinvent itself, Dragon Quest seems to stick to what works. And they build off of the same elements, the same familiar elements, the sounds are the same, the monsters are the same. But they tweak it. You know, it's not the same game over and over again. They tweak it, they introduce new stories, but they stick to what works. As opposed to Final Fantasy, which after 7, just every game had to be something wildly and completely different than the last one. So, yay for Dragon Quest overall. And for me, like for some of you perhaps, this was my welcome to Dragon Quest II. So as usual, I have prepared a story synopsis, and Russ is here to talk about the characters.
Yay. Which are fascinating in this game.
Nuanced.
Very, yes. More dynamic than any other characters.
Following the defeat of the Dragon Lord in the previous game, the hero's descendants ruled the world in peace for generations. And then Hargon the Wizard broke the peace. And now it is up to those descendants to gather the mystical artifacts of their ancestors and defeat the wizard once and for all.
That's dramatic. That sounds like it's a very involved story.
It is.
That sounds like there's going to be a lot going on. You're going to...
A lot of plot twists,
a lot of plot twists and turns.
Betrayals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're going to visit a lot of different regions.
The game may be a little light on the plot, is kind of what we're driving at.
Yeah.
But, is it light on the characters? Russ?
Well, the characters are amazing. I have never played with such in-depth characters. You have such memorable characters as the Prince of Maidenhall. What's the prince's name?
Prince.
Prince. You have the Prince of Canuck. What's his name?
Prince.
And the Princess of Moonbrook, named
Prince.
And the 3 of them journey together to destroy the evil Hargon, who has absolutely no presence within the game beyond the last 5 minutes.
Well, no, he shows up. He's kind of mentioned in the prologue. There is action. There's a cutscene in the beginning.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which is more than we got with the first game. The first
Right.
game didn't even have this action cutscene in the beginning.
The cutscene is a little misleading on how involved the plot of this game is going to be. It's actually a pretty good cutscene for 1980 whatever.
Well, and you compare it to... So Final Fantasy 1 came out about the same time Dragon Quest 2 did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall Final Fantasy 1 having any actual cutscenes at all.
No.
It's just controlled what the player... Whereas this one at least opens with action and drama, and you learn a little bit of the story. But Russ is right. That's kind of the end of the story.
And then it never happens again.
Yeah. But we are talking about very early technology and just learning what these video games could do. So the fact that the characters are one-dimensional and the fact that the story is almost non-existent is par for the course. It's hard to hold that against Dragon Quest II because it would be shocking if that wasn't the case.
Right. You have to think about what was modern in video game technology in the 80s.
And in fact, this game does push the envelope in a few areas, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Because next, unless you have anything else to say about the characters or story.
I wanted to know more about the Prince of Connacht's sister.
Did you?
I wanted her to join.
And she
Hala, I remember her name was Hala. And she, like, Hala!
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
I was trying to make a Hala Batgirl reference,
Right, yeah.
and I realized there was no way I could make it funny.
Yeah, and I succeeded beautifully.
Yes.
But no, I wanted her to join. I wondered why she had to stay home while the Princess of Moonbrook traveled with you. For the record, here's an interesting thing that most people probably won't find interesting, but I do. It's that you get to know, like all the Dragon Quest games, pretty much, you get to name your protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And then the names of the prince and princess are randomly generated depending on what you have named the protagonist.
I did not know that.
Yes, mine were Lars and Gwen.
I don't remember mine at all. I can't help you.
So they really captured your heart.
To be fair, so we filmed several episodes at once of this because Russ lives in a different town. I've addressed that a couple of times, which means I played Dragon Quest II for this review months ago. Months ago.
Behind the scenes.
And I play these games a lot faster than Russ does. Like, a lot faster. I don't know what his problem is.
I like to take my time and enjoy things.
Russ has got issues.
So anyway, the names of your prince and princess are different based on a hexadecimal equation.
I actually do find that interesting.
Yeah, and there's 8 or 10 different names that you can get for the prince or princess.
That's fact.
And some of them are really weird. I'm glad that I got pretty normal names.
That almost belongs in innovation because that's pretty neat. I can't think of another game that does that, where your characters' names are randomly generated based off what you name your
And
character.
there's actually, if you go to Game FAQs, there's a guide
as to how to get what
as
name
to
you
how to
like.
get what name. It gives you the hex equations for how to get what name you want. So, anyway,
for completionists.
Yeah, just a little tidbit.
This game isn't mine until my companions are named Steve and Linda.
Right. If you're into programming math, you can look that up on Game FAQs and manipulate the names.
That is mildly interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the combat system.
Yay!
There is not much here. In many of our reviews, I have used the Dragon Quest battle template to describe how combat systems work in other games. This is that template. I mean, it is first-person perspective. It's just the same as the previous game. The only difference is you now have multiple party members to pick from.
And multiple enemies. No more one enemy at a time, like the first one.
You can see multiple enemies. The multiple enemies can form up into subgroups.
Mm-hmm.
So, 2 slimes, but you can't pick which one of the 2 slimes you want to attack. You just say, I want to attack that group of slimes, and your characters will attack one of them.
So what's more annoying? When you encounter 3 slimes and they're all in the same group, or when you encounter 3 slimes and they're all separate?
I'd say when you encounter 3 slimes and 2 of them are in a group and one of them is separate.
Yes.
Because the game does that. It groups so randomly.
Yeah.
And you can still attack enemies that aren't there anymore, which I've always hated.
Yes.
If an enemy is defeated before you take your turn, I guess...
Is that like a limitation of the NES somehow? Because I feel like, because I don't think it was until the Super NES Dragon Quests that they even were able to remedy that. Or the Final Fantasies, even though we didn't get all of them.
Well, see, I wonder if it's a limitation or if it's designed that way on purpose. And if it's designed that way on purpose...
It's dumb.
Well, I wonder if the reasoning is to force the player to use more strategy, or if the thought is this combat actually happens all at once. Like, we see it as turn-based, but in reality, all of these moves happen at the same time.
True. I can see that. I can see, like, two warriors going after the same thing at the same time, and one kills the other one, and the other one just whiffs.
Yeah. Or maybe it was just, this is how these games are supposed to be made. This is... That way the player has to strategize and play. I hate it.
I just don't think...
I
can't remember an RPG until the Super NES era that didn't have that.
I'd have to look back at the games we've played. But, yeah, no, I've always hated it, and it's still present here. But apart from that...
And when the enemies are grouped into the same group, they normally never hit the ones that you want them to. Like... Fighter A and Fighter B are not going to hit the same monster to kill it.
No, they're going to weaken both of them.
They're going to hit somebody different. It's very annoying.
It is.
So it's wonderful when you finally get spells that just hit the whole enemy party. Which is very late in the game.
But very useful.
Very useful.
So, yeah, I think that's pretty much all we have to say about combat system.
It's the template for...
Yeah, it is as standard... first-person turn-based combat as you can get. For a reason, it's not like we're playing these games in some kind of, we play them all over the place, PlayStation, and then back to NES, and then forward into... So, this game came out, it set the template. It created it.
If you're very old like we are, and you played these games back when they first came out, then these were all... revolutionary and building to what we have now.
Yeah.
So
know your fundamentals, Joe.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and move on to something this game does have some of: innovation.
Yay.
So for innovations, I think what we're doing is we're comparing this mostly to the previous game, as well as talking about innovations in general. For example, an innovation in this game, as the second game in the series, you have party members.
Yay! Finally,
you
you're
encounter
not
multiple
out there
monsters.
by yourself.
Yes.
Somebody could have carried the princess for you if you had party members in the first one.
Yeah. Or the princess could have joined your party.
That's true.
So while that's not an innovation to JRPGs in general, it was an innovation, A, at the time, and B, to the Dragon Quest series. Right. The world is actually much, much bigger than the first game.
You don't just explore one series of interconnected islands / continents?
No, the first one was all on one continent, and it was like...
There were bridges.
5 towns. Yeah, I guess. But what is kind of fun, this game is actually so big that at a certain point you get to go back to the original continent that the first game was on. And when you set foot on that continent, the music changes back. The enemies are back. This is set 100 years later, or hundreds of years later, I forget.
You're like the great-great-grandchildren from the first Dragon Warrior.
But it's actually kind of neat when you set foot on that continent and the old music from the first game.
I was going to say that. Did you notice, too, that the music changes once you have your entire party of 3?
Yes.
The overworld music starts as one thing, and then once you finally get your 3... your 2 companions to join your main character, you get more of like a jaunty overworld map tune, which a lot of Dragon Quests do. So I like that. For someone that doesn't know a lot about music, it's noticeable and it's a fun
when it changes for a reason.
And then when it changes when you land on the original game map.
But one of the reasons I'm bringing up the original continent is it is proof, it is solid, quick proof that this game is so much bigger than the last one, because the original game is basically contained in a corner of this one.
Right.
The original continent with most of the original cities, the original monsters, the original game is mostly still there, but now there's this whole world wrapped around it. And it's kind of amazing that there's that big a difference 1 year later. on the same system.
Right. So it's such a bigger map.
I will say this game also had kind of one of the issues Breath of Fire had with the extremely unfocused narrative.
True.
Right, you're told you got to go defeat this wizard, but most of the game is just wandering around the world, hoping you run into a relic.
Yeah, once you get a ship, the world opens up, I thought, almost too much, because it doesn't, once you get that ship,
There's no more guidance.
Doesn't really tell you anything else to do, so you have to just wander aimlessly until you start talking to NPCs and like piecing together little bits of plot and like where you're supposed to go, what you're supposed to do.
Go everywhere, check everything, hope you find all the items.
It was part of the NES era of sort of like artificially making RPGs longer by just not giving you any
Well,
kind
I don't
of
know if I'd even
instruction.
blame it on the NES era, because I don't know if you played the original Ultima games on the PC, but they were very similar in construction. Like, you're the hero, here's who the end boss is, here's a world, go.
Yeah.
And it was very much wandering around trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next, which is what this game is.
And this is kind of a higher order idea or whatever, but what I find interesting is that that's kind of where Western RPGs have stayed, and then JRPGs have become the like story-driven, character-focused things we think of now. I mean, you look like Skyrim, and that's what Skyrim is. You just kind of drop somewhere, and
You have the whole world to
you
explore.
just have the whole world. But JRPGs
I can
have
see that.
morphed into this like much more linear, but very character-rich and story-rich.
You don't think about it with these older games, but this really is kind of an example of a sandbox game. Here's a world, there's a quest in there, go find it. But no, I get what you're saying.
Which is the what am I trying to say? The sort of the cycle of life of RPGs is that Dragon Warrior is based on those old Ultima and like wizardry games from the United States, and now we have games from the United States that are trying to grasp into that Japanese storytelling. It's a fun circle of life.
There is actually one thing this game
It's a
does.
very philosophical game, apparently.
It's very deep. There's one thing that this game does that I very rarely see. In fact, I can't remember another example of in JRPGs. There is a moment where you have to turn off the game in order to progress.
True.
I
hated it.
I can't remember exactly what it is, but you're waiting for
When
somebody to
you-
build you something.
Well, to construct the princess's final garment armor,
Okay,
you have
that's
to
what it
take
is.
it to the town. You have to take the yarn that they'll use to make it, whatever. You have to take it to the town, and then the guy that will make the dress or whatever for her will say, "Well, I'll work on it and come back later." And
I think he says, "Come back tomorrow."
something like, yes, because you think that you just need to go
Go
stay
stay
at
at
the
the
inn. But no, you can stay at the inn
Forever.
an infinite number
But
of
no.
times, and he's never finished that garment.
You have to turn the game
Right.
system off, then turn it back on, and then it progresses. Like, the game actually keeps track of whether or not you turn the game off
Right.
to progress the plot, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure I would have liked that as a kid, but I find it
Yeah.
very interesting. I wonder if the thought was like, okay, you've played enough video games for one day. Come back tomorrow.
That's true. Yeah, I don't remember that moment when I was a kid, but I probably got frustrated and gave up, and then thought like, I'm just going to go to sleep. And then,
And then the next day
came
at
home from
work.
school the next day, and I'm like, oh, he finished it. Like there was a little man in my NES that whole time.
He
working
was
on that
working while you were
dress.
at school.
He was sewing that dress.
So the first game, you could only save at the starting town with the king. This game,
Mhm.
you still can only save with kings, but there's more than one,
Mhm.
but not every town has one.
And sometimes old men will just let you say.
Sometimes, yeah.
But
So
it's kind of arbitrary.
you kind of have to learn which cities you can save at and which ones you can't. You kind of have to keep track in your head of, okay, I can't save at this town, maybe I can save at the next town.
It also introduces the return spell, which will return you to the
To
last town you saved at. In all future iterations of this game, you get a list.
You get to travel
And
back
you
to any
can
town you
go
want.
to any town
You know,
want.
it actually took me a minute. It took me a little bit to figure out how the return spell was working, because I thought it was returning me to the last town I was in,
No.
and then it didn't. It does. It returns you to the last town you saved
Saved
at.
in. Mm-hmm.
Which, when you're playing on an emulator and using save state instead of saving the game as often...
If you never save,
Yeah.
that would take you back to Maidenhall.
Exactly.
The first town.
And then, of course, because it is an early Dragon Quest game, so much grinding.
Yeah.
Because that was just part of the experience back then.
Again, I think, kind of an artificial way to make the game longer. But
Probably.
Still.
Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about before we moved on to our expert topic of music?
Nothing specific except parts that I liked, which are that you can go talk to like the grandson of the old Dragon Lord.
I did like that.
From the original game, and he basically just says like, I'm out, people. Like, there's somebody more evil than me, and you need to go kill him. Like, I'm nothing anymore.
You can go through the original end dungeon, which was the Dragon Lord's castle, and it has all the same enemies and traps and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get to where the end boss stands, there's just the end boss's great-grandson just chilling. And you don't fight him. He's like, I thought I was going to take over the world, but now there's this guy, so...
Yep.
I thought that was fun.
I liked that. I liked revisiting the...
It's completely unnecessary, too. Like,
Yeah.
you don't need to do it.
No. I liked visiting the king from the original kingdom in the first game, and he also is just like, well, I'm done. Did you see him? Did you go meet him?
I can't remember.
Okay. Because he's not on his throne. He's just locked himself in his bedroom.
No, I did not.
And he's like, hey, people! He's like, I guess this is all your responsibility now. Because Hargon is just too strong for us. So despite the lack of the story, there are those little kind of funny touches of things that I like.
Hidden in the corners of the game.
Right, yeah. And I liked the, not a spoiler or whatever, but in the last dungeon, when you first enter it, it just looks like the castle that you start in.
Yes.
Which I do remember was very disorienting to me as a child. I thought the game had glitched. I actually remember that, thinking like, what has happened that I'm back in, and I think I had to look at my Nintendo Power or something. So it has some fun little things like that.
It does. And the Dragon Quest series in general is known for having kind of that cutesy sense of humor about itself. And I think this is where that started.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and talk about music.
Yay, my favorite part.
So you may have noticed, Russ and I, again, not musical experts. And we're constantly...
What are you talking about?
And we are constantly
I love music.
hunting for somebody who can do music in these video games some justice.
Anything by Dolly Parton.
So I'm going to ignore Russ and tell you that we have recruited my friend Mike, who actually does write video game music reviews for various websites. The guy actually knows what he's talking about. So we are going to cut to our hotel room for PAX South in San Antonio, where we got to talk to Mike about the music of Dragon Quest II. Hey everybody! Welcome to Home on the RNG on the road, I guess. We're in San Antonio for PAX South, which happens to also be the hometown of our special musical review guest who actually knows what the hell he's talking about with music, as opposed to Russ and I. See, he's doing this, but I glanced over at his script. Like, Russ and I write this much, and like, yeah, that's all right. He's got pages. This man...
I'm indebted to those who came before me, and so I'll give appropriate shout-outs throughout here.
But just to introduce, this is Mike Hughes. He's a staff writer for VGMO, Video Game Music Online. In his day career, he works as an information librarian? No. Instructional librarian at Trinity University. So, a fairly smart fellow, as opposed to us bumbling buffoons.
Yeah.
So, Mike.
Yes.
The Dragon Quest II music.
Yeah, so Dragon Quest II. So I thought it would be good if we just start with your impressions of the soundtrack or your recollections. If I mention the name Koichi Sugiyama to you...
Well, I've obviously heard of him because I've played every Dragon Quest.
Okay.
I've played almost every one.
Yeah.
I don't know the guy's name.
And because the Dragon Quest, especially that intro theme, has stayed the same.
That's right.
Virtually.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole series. So I am familiar with him.
Okay.
Just for Dragon Quest.
And
I'm familiar with the Dragon Quest themes that are used in all the games. I didn't know the guy's name,
okay.
but I assumed it was probably the same guy working on the whole series, since thematically the music all seems similar throughout the series.
Right. And that is a pretty remarkable thing, because at 86, Sugiyama is still composing for the franchise. In fact, he just completed the soundtrack for Dragon Quest XI last year. So at 86, he is probably the preeminent game composer in the world. I can't think of anyone to rival him except for maybe Koji Kondo or Nobuo Uematsu.
I actually know that name. That might be the only JRPG composer name that I know.
And I think it's telling that, in terms of influence and stature, we can certainly mention those names alongside Sugiyama, but Uematsu has actually credited Sugiyama as a chief influence on him, and at one time called him the, quote, big boss of game music. So he casts a very long shadow. And, this is someone who had a long and fruitful career before he came into video games, right? He was a classically trained composer. In 1958, he graduates from the University of Tokyo, and he enters the film and television industry in Japan. And so he's scoring for anime, he's scoring for films and commercials. He wrote pop songs for the singers of his day. So he was something of a celebrity.
Yeah.
Do you know something here?
No, I'm fascinated.
Yeah,
I'm
so
fascinated by the history lesson.
This is remarkable because it was very unusual for someone of his stature to score music for games. And so there's a kind of a turning point when he begins to work with Enix on Dragon Quest, because this is arguably the point at which people begin to take video game music seriously. Mm-hmm. And there's an oft-repeated anecdote here that I'm going to give again, which explains how Sugiyama became involved with the franchise. He's actually a very avid video gamer, and he played an NX game for the PC 8801 called, I'm going to have to look this one up here. So it's Kazuro Morita's Shogi. So it's a Shogi game.
Oh, well, that one.
Exactly. I was just playing that on the way over here. So, so he's playing this Shogi game, and he loves this game so much that he writes a fan letter to NX. And he tells them basically, I really love this game, and I like video games a lot. Yours truly, Koichi Sugiyama. And the people at NX are just like, oh my god! Senpai noticed us! Just like, so they have this fan freak out, and they write back, and they basically invite him to, I don't know if it happened quite this way, but they reach back out to him, and by turns, he's invited to come and do music for Enix. So his first project for the company is a game called World Golf, also on the PC 88. And so he does this game World Golf. Well, his very next project is, you guessed this, Dragon Quest, right? So the first Dragon Quest has a kind of, it has very little music, right? It has what is now called sort of the 8 melodies approach to RPG music, which set a template for RPG soundtracks for years to come. And so this is the approach in which every major section of the game has a kind of thematic entry. So town, castle, overworld.
Cave.
Exactly. And you can see that, so we're certainly going to see that in Dragon Quest II, but you can see that all the way up to the present era. So of course soundtracks have gotten more elaborate and longer, much longer in some cases. But that basic approach is still very much intact. So some other firsts here that I think are worth mentioning. Again, I mentioned that having someone classically trained come into games, that was a first.
Right.
But it brought a kind of prestige to game music that
Which makes sense.
Right, that was previously missing. And so one of the ways that we can gauge that is an arranged version of Sugiyama's Dragon Quest music was the first to be performed live by a symphony orchestra. That established a series of concerts that were repeated for years and years up to the present era. And it was also the first video game soundtrack to be issued commercially. So there was,
Nice.
yeah.
I did not know either of those things.
I think I already mentioned that Sugiyama is an avid gamer. So he once told an interviewer, I'm just going to read this here because I think it's worth reading at length. So I don't drink, and the things most adults spend their time on, like karaoke, golf, mahjong, I spend that time on games. I often get asked by people, what's so fun about playing with an artificial mechanical companion like a video game? This may be something that we hear from time to time too, right?
Right.
So even back then. Well, his answer to that is, this is a machine made by a human, and it represents that creator's feelings and ideas. So Dragon Quest was made by Yuji Horii, Nakamura Koichi, other producers, and myself too. It's a piece of our personalities. So when I'm playing a video game, I feel like I'm playing a game with the creators.
I like that.
That's very profound.
Yeah.
So-
that makes games that we love, like
Yeah.
Persona 4 or Final Fantasy 4, these sorts of
Right.
Chrono Trigger. It adds an extra depth to that. I like that.
So it's a very sympathetic response, right? At a time when games were comparatively primitive. So I think
Right.
it's interesting that he was much more thoughtful about that experience that he was having than certainly my parents were about the games that I was playing at that time. So this is someone who never felt that games were a waste of time or inferior in any way. I mean, again, he's working with some of the biggest names in Japan doing music. His work has been compared to Baroque composers like Handel and Bach even, and so for him to come and do work on this very primitive platform is pretty striking. And he never discussed this work in a way that made it seem like it was reductive or that he was doing someone a favor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that carries through in the music. That's
Right.
partly why it's so timeless and why people still love it so much today. Yeah, I think as we mentioned at the top, Sugiyama is still the composer of Dragon Quest, has always been the composer of Dragon Quest.
Which is impressive because we say he just did 11, but there's also like dozens and dozens of spin-offs.
Right.
All of which, I don't know if he's the composer for every single spin-off, but they all share the musical themes that he created in the first place.
Right.
I don't know that there's a Dragon Quest spin-off that doesn't start with the same opening theme.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's one of those critical pieces of music that just completely
Right.
it takes the player immediately to that universe, right? You're
Dragon Quest.
You're in Dragon Quest.
Exactly what you're getting
Um,
into.
And so this is not the only franchise for which Sugiyama has composed. He has various credits throughout his gameography, shall we say. But
Are there any other notable ones, do you know?
Well, I think it's striking that that his work on Dragon Quest is basically unbroken from 2001 till 2017. If you go and there's a really nice list on Wikipedia, and if you go and look at that, it's just Dragon Quest titles, including their spin-offs, since 2001, when he last composed music for a game called Derby Stallion 64, which I have not played. The horse racing games have not yet.
As soon as this video is over, though, we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Derby Stallion 64.
We're going to do tournament style. It's going to be great.
So this is, as you've gathered, this is the franchise for which he has done the most work. And even when other composers come in to do work on Dragon Quest, there was a Dragon Quest game for the Wii. Do you know what it was called? I think maybe Dragon Quest Swords.
There was Dragon Quest Swords.
So
Yeah.
that soundtrack was composed by Manami Matsume, you may know as the composer of the first Mega Man game. But even then, she's sort of beholden to the work that's come before, and so very often you have composers coming in and they're just doing arranged versions of his songs.
Right.
So,
Right.
I'd like to point out,
Yeah, I never
this
would
is
guess.
this is the first time Mike has met Russ, and he yet instinctively knew, hey, there was a Dragon Quest for the Wii. I'm going to ask
Yeah,
you
I
because
know.
there's no way that, and I didn't.
I have it.
I like that he immediately
Yeah,
picked up like,
don't worry.
hey, Japanese games, that guy.
Yeah.
nice.
It was good.
It's the aura. I'm just like sipping on your
Yeah.
aura. You can't see that, but it's very nutritious. So Dragon Quest II, there's just under 20 minutes of music. So it's very, very brief, not including the sound effects, which I believe he also was responsible for. I think it's worth mentioning here that at the time of Dragon Quest II's development, game composers were as much programmers as they were composers, right? So this is a little beyond my ken, but in terms of how this was actually done, but you had to program this music in note by note, and it was difficult, right? It had a kind of level of technical difficulty. Well, That is not something that Sugiyama did, right? He relied on NX developers to kind of translate his compositions, but he wrote them in such a way that they would play nicely on, again, what's very primitive.
Very limited at the time, yeah.
Yeah, basically, you know,
Beats and
two
boots.
channels for melody, one for bass, and one for static, which is also used for percussion. So it's kind of remarkable what he's able to do with that.
Which is still more than I knew already.
So shall we listen to some music? from
Sure.
Dragon Quest? So, getting started here. So I think we should begin at the top, right? Where else to begin
Of
except
course.
with the main title?
Right.
And so this fanfare made its debut in Dragon Quest, and of course is still with very minor variations, is what we'll hear all the way up through.
They
lot
just
of it.
seem to add more
Right,
instruments,
yeah.
is what happens.
All right. So this is main title. Okay. Wipe his tears from your eyes.
I know, yeah.
It's a very triumphant tune.
Absolutely.
It's like you've already saved the day.
Right.
So, main title. This is, like you say, it's a fanfare. These sound like horns, right?
Right.
This sounds
Yeah.
like you're entering maybe like a king's court or something, right? You're being heralded.
Yes.
So you have three
I've always
voices.
wanted to be heralded.
Well, this is for you.
This is now the music when I enter a club or whatever. This is
So here you've got those three voices. Two are very bright channels. They are mostly playing in harmony, and then you have that triangle wave kind of pulsing away in the background, and that's your bass line. The pitch is high, cheerful. This is a very optimistic song. This is music that urges the player forward, and I've written here, you know, again, the image that comes to mind for me is very much that the castle gates are swinging open and you're kind of walking down this long red carpet, which sort of ends in a throne and awaiting sovereign. That's what comes to mind for me. So that's the main title. Let's listen to Overworld 2. And so you've just played this game.
Yes.
So if I play this, like, what are you seeing?
We're in a town.
actually no. This is the Overworld theme. This is the one that I told you reminds me a little bit of the Little Nemo soundtrack, the NES game.
Oh, is this okay?
That was as far as my musical analysis went. There's kind of a cheeriness to it.
All right, it's very upbeat.
Yeah, that's
So you
as
hear
far.
one channel here. So you have one channel that's just doing a kind of rhythm guitar, let's say. So it keeps rhythm by alternating between two notes. Bump, 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 bump. And then the most prominent channel is the one that carries the melody, right?
Even
And
I can
here-
notice that part.
Yeah. Here we have of course, the bass channel comes in as well, but only, this will be harder to hear now, maybe you can splice a piece in here. But the bass kind of is withheld until the refrain, and then it comes in and it adds two notes that kind of play off of that rhythm channel we mentioned before, and then that creates a kind of contrapuntal melody to the main melody. So this is a track that's a little more complex than the main title we just heard. Very pretty. And then let's listen to one more selection unless you have requests. Anything?
No.
What stood out for you? Is there anything that you found yourself humming as you were doing the dishes?
Well, the traditional Dragon Quest sounds. The opening obviously sticks with you. What we just cut off, which I think is the dungeon crawler, it's the cave music from the first game. That sticks out. For me, one of the most noticeable, and we mentioned this in the innovation section, one of the most noticeable things for me was when you actually visit the continent of Dragon Quest 1 and Dragon Quest 2, they bring back in the music from the first game.
Right.
So that stood out because it was...
It's some thematic cohesion between the two titles.
Yeah, just as soon as it's the one area in the world, as soon as you set foot on this grass, you're back in Dragon Quest
Right.
1.
Nice. So this isn't as Memorable isn't quite the word I want. I don't think you catch yourself humming this quite as much, but it's certainly worth playing in terms of contrast. This is the theme for Malroth.
So you've got the dark, menacing tones.
Mm-hmm.
Something's looming.
Right.
So it sounds very methodical, slower. Chords are minor, so, and you have easier to hear in headphones especially, but when the two channels play together, they kind of buzz. There's a very harsh dissonance to this, which is appropriate given the entity for which this is composed. Right? A god of destruction, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right. So that is Dragon Quest II.
Okay. Were there any other points you wanted to hit before we wrap this up?
Just that a lot of the music here is, again, it's stuff that you'll hear throughout other games, especially the Resurrection theme. There's not a lot of long selections here. There's a lot of jingle like work, so we can listen to the victory fanfare. It's a good note to end on, right?
There you go.
Another
Gained
one
a
that,
level.
Yeah, another one that will be familiar to Dragon Quest fans. This is really lovely. Actually, you can tell me where in the game you hear this.
Can we? Russ, where do we hear that in the game?
So that's called echoing flute. It's a jingle, I suppose.
Yes, that.
It's very simple. It's very pretty though, and
When you to find the crests.
Oh,
To
that's right.
find the 5 crests that you need, you use the echoing flute. When it got to that little piece at the end, that's the piece that plays
When you find...
when there is a crest.
Yes.
When you have played the
Okay,
flute,
okay.
and there is a crest in the area you're
Thank God Russ is here.
Yeah.
And if we didn't divulge this, I don't think I'm giving away anything, but my approach to these soundtracks was to come and listen to them as one who has not played the game, whereas these two gentlemen have. And so you're getting two kind of different contrasts. One, music in context, and then for me, it's just approaching it as a listener.
Well, music in context, incompetence. And I've said this so many times. My friend came up with a brilliant term to describe me and Russ, which is musical agnostics. Like,
oh, I like that.
it's there.
It's there.
Yeah.
The game is better for it?
Yeah,
you could say that.
I would
Right.
definitely notice if the game did not have any music, but
Yeah.
music has never been something that like grabs me, and that's a failing with me. I think I focus on other things. I enjoy other aspects so much more. For me, it's story. When I'm playing a video game, it's all about the story. But like a movie, I'd notice if the music wasn't there.
Right.
But this is the reason why we need to bring in somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about, because Russ and I talking about music is sad.
Right.
Well, I think, I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because one of the other things that that Sugiyama has discussed in an interview is his approach to composition, and I think games are very often likened to movies. And again, at a very early point in his composition career, he said, "I really don't think that's accurate. They're more like ballet." You think ballet, and he goes on to explain, well, the ballet has a very typically, right, has a very simple narrative. You're not there to focus on story, right? There's enough of a story to kind of hold the dance together, but you're there to watch the movement of the dancers on stage. And it was the same for his games, at least original Dragon Quest entries, where the stories were very simple. You're not there to play you're not playing for the story per se, right? There's enough of a story, the 5 MacGuffins,
Right.
to
That's very true. That's
Yeah.
very true of those early games.
and so there's more attention paid to these very strong and memorable melodies because He wants the player to hear the music, to enjoy it, to recognize it, and crucially, to be able to listen to it hundreds and hundreds of times
Right.
without getting sick of it.
On an endless loop.
And so it's certainly much more prominent and catchier than it would be if it were a movie, because then very often the music is there to create a certain mood.
Mm-hmm.
But you, as certainly if you're a first-time viewer, you're not meant to be focusing on that music, right? You're feeling a certain way because of it, but you're focused on the dialogue and the unfurling of the plot and so forth.
All right. Well, I think that's enough time for Dragon Quest II.
Dragon Quest 2.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Very
thank you.
insightful.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
There you go.
So Mike will join us next for our next game, so you can look forward to him there. We'll see you guys next month. Russ and I have to get back to PAX.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed this game. I like the Dragon Quest series in general. I was excited to play this one because it means that we're moving on in the line of Dragon Quest games, and we play 3 soon and 4 soon, and those are all fantastic. But I do enjoy this game. I would overall give it a B+. The grinding is a little, even for someone like me who likes occasional grinding, it's a tad much in this game, and then of course there's not a ton in the way of characters or story, but it is a fun little game, and like we said before, it's the foundation on which future greater games are based on. So I had fun, and I would say B+.
I feel a little bit about this game like I did about Mother 1, which was I know it's leading to something good, but I had a difficult time appreciating this in and of itself. And it's just because of the things we pointed out that are normal for its age. The lack of focused narrative, the mechanics being extremely vanilla, the grinding especially. I am a Dragon Quest fan. I love where the games get. Even the 4th one is great. The 4th one on, I've enjoyed all of them. 6 a little less so, but that's my own personal taste. C+, that's as good as I can do. I will probably never play this game again, but it's not on that list of, thank God I never have to play it again, like Arcana or anything like that. But I don't picture myself picking this up and replaying it for fun. And that's just because I hate grinding. And there wasn't much here. There wasn't much meat on these bones for me. I play games for stories, and this one didn't have much of one. So there you go. Where do they go if they want to play Dragon Quest 2?
You have so many options. So you can play the original NES version, which is what we played. You could play the Game Boy Advance remake, which is actually bundled with the remake of Dragon Warrior 1 on the same cartridge. You could also just grab your iPhone or Android device and play it there as well, because there is an iOS version that is completely updated, new graphics, new everything.
Why didn't we play that one?
Because then you wouldn't get the experience of a child, of a young child. In
I'm not a young
1988.
child anymore, Russ. I haven't been for a year and a half.
Yeah. Well, I'm 400 years old, so I'm trying to experience my youth.
Okay.
Yep. So NES, Game Boy, or basically any any mobile platform, and that is just fast. The game is. I've played it. I played it on my phone, and it's just faster. Like, you still have to grind and stuff, but everything's just quick. Everything moves at a faster clip, and there's updated graphics and things. So, but other than that, it's essentially the exact same game. So you got a lot of options if you want to experience the Dragon Warrior / Quest 2.
Next time, we'll be discussing a game that you have less options if you want to play.
Which is just a travesty.
A game that neither Russ nor I had played before.
This one was really exciting because I've played basically all of these before, and I had never played even a minute of this game.
I had watched like 2 minutes of somebody else playing it
Yeah.
once, many years ago, and that was it. I remember to one. Anyway, we'll get into
I was
that
on the
next
edge of my
time.
seat.
So next time it is Skies of Arcadia Legends on the Nintendo GameCube.
Yay!
You don't want to miss that one.
Yeah, don't miss
Unlike this episode, it's going to be a good episode. So we'll see you there.
Bye. Nevertheless, I did play it and beat it, and now I have recently played it again. Someone's having a coughing fit, so I'm probably just going to have to do this over.